I'm very glad to be with you, even if it's virtually. I was recalling that I was in Maryland 2 years ago. It felt it was last year, but in fact it was 2 years ago. I enjoyed it very much. It was Indian summer, so I guess I was lucky to be in October in Maryland, but I have good memories of it. So today I'm in California in Philo. I'm at the winery. It's a beautiful day out there, and it's nearly 6 p.m. for you on the East Coast. So it's definitely time for a glass of bubbly and enjoying some of that wine. So as Kim said, Donnie will be monitoring the chat. If you have any questions, anything that you want to ask, please feel free to text that question to Donnie, and then Donnie will relay that question to me, and then I can answer to the rest of the group. I don't intend to do this as a class, even though I can be speaking for 2 hours or 3 hours or more, depending on the questions you may have. So I can be unstoppable unless my bottle of wine is empty, then I'll have to stop and refill. I want to brush up a little bit on who I am, who the winery is, and talk about the wine. And that can be a lot of, about a lot of topics. So get comfortable. Maybe you can pour yourself the first bottle of wine, and then I'll talk a little bit about me. And I also at some point stop and share my screen so I can also show you some pictures of what it is. I think it's also good to have some kind of a visual aspect of the valley, the winery. It kind of like puts a nice spin on also putting a face, not only to me, but also to the place. So as you can say from my accent, I have a East Coast accent, but from way east, from across the pond. Born and raised in France, I basically did my studies in France and in winemaking, and that was over 25 years ago. And after graduating from my master's degree in winemaking and vineyard management, I ended up taking an internship in California to discover the world. Worked for Roederer Estate in Philo, California, and that little 6-month internship ended up a 2-year experience, and I liked it very much. Went back to France, worked for 5 years for another company, but I kept very good relationship with the family, because Roederer Estate is a family-owned winery, and that family has a nice estate in Champagne. It is Maison Louis Roederer, Champagne Louis Roederer. They've been making champagne since 1776. It's a great vintage, right? It's a great vintage for America. That's why it's easy to remember that that date. And so that family decided to create an estate in California in the early 80s. There was a there is the, cheers to some, I have an empty glass, but I'll join you, shortly. So there was a gold rush of the European wineries to going to California. It was in the late 70s, early 80s. There was definitely the idea that, America would open up to fine dining and, drinking more wine, way more wine than before. And it did happen. Now this is, history. There are over 5,000 wineries now just in California alone. There are wineries in every state of the union except I think Alaska right now. So it's it's pretty funny to know that there's a winery everywhere in every single state but Alaska. And then the family, so when establishing the estate in the Anderson Valley, looked at some features. Why would you go to the Anderson Valley? Well, it's a nice place to be in California. And I'll show a little map, shortly, because we're not very far from the Pacific Ocean, and then we're in Northern California, and the Pacific Ocean where we are is fairly cold. The current from Alaska goes down, down along the coast, so it makes pretty cold water, and that creates a huge, massive amount of cold water that is using what we kind of use as a natural air conditioning system. So even though we're at the latitude of the south of Spain in Europe, we have a weather, because of that cool weather that the ocean creates, we can grow grapes and varieties that grow in northern part of France. So I'm going to share a screen. So for the one that have a big screen, it's going to be nice to read. For the one that have a small screen, well, maybe not so nice, but I would say, you can still listen to me, and I'll explain a little bit. Here we go. This is, a small map of where we are. You can see San Francisco at the bottom of that screen, and then we are 125 miles north of San Francisco and about 18 miles away from the ocean, in the area where Philo and Boonville are. So you usually don't go over there by mistake. You're either lost or you really made a choice to end up in the Anderson Valley. If you see, you can see St. Helena, Calistoga. This is the Napa Valley on the right side of your screen. So further east from us, and that's about 2.5 hours driving, and this is much warmer climate. So Napa, you grow Cab, Merlot easily. In Philo, Boonville, Cab and Merlot absolutely not grow well. So this is more the world of Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Riesling, Gewürztraminer. Just because of the temperature that we have and the weather pattern we have. And so speaking of weather pattern, we have obviously I'm gonna go to the next slide. Oops. All right, here we go, the next slide. So we are coastal from California, so we get a fair amount of rain. 40 inches of rain is pretty usual, and then we have those majestic redwoods growing because that's the area where fog and meets the coast. We have all of that energy, sprouting off the ground. This is something that's pretty majestic. Those tall redwoods. This is where we are in redwood country, and fairly remote and I would say rural. So that's also a picture I like because it shows two things from the area. First of all, not many people around. It's pretty rolling hills, gentle rolling hills, not very high altitude. And this is a picture taken in the morning around 10 a.m. And you see that there's the fog is burning off slowly. And it has cooled down the weather for the day. And it's really nice, enjoyable to have cool nights, and it warms them during the day. This is really those cycles of cooling off and warming up. Another snapshot of the valley floor, and then you can see all of those redwood forests around us, the fog above us, and you can see the vineyard on the valley floor. That's a nice picture.
Arnaud, I have a question for you.
Yes, Donnie.
So you're showing us how far north Philo is and where the winery is. In relation to how bad the California fires have been, where have the fires been in relation to Philo, and also the terrain of Anderson Valley? How has that protected or been affected by the fires?
Right. So that's something that's pretty typical of being on the coast of California is as the day goes on, the sun heats the ground, and then hot air basically rises, which creates that marine layer to come in. So basically you get west winds coming from the west. So you have that marine breeze. It's fairly typical. So even though you may have a fire, 10, 20 miles, inland from us, that marine layer breeze tends to bring fresh air from the ocean and then push the smoke away from us. So this year, there were 3 major fires. One started, right after the August 17th. It was a storm. It was a dry storm. We got lightnings. I got lightnings, the night of Sunday, August 18th, and started about over 100 fires. throughout the northern part of California. And then the closest from us was around Sebastopol area in Sonoma County. And we got smoke for a couple of days, like a light smoke, but the marine breeze mostly push that smoke away from us. The other big one that was started at the same time of that fire was called the August Complex, and that basically was studied in the Mendocino National Forest, about 50 miles also east from us. And for the same reason, most of that smoke, came and went away from us because of that, breeze. And then the last one was, about 4 weeks ago, was the fire from the Napa area. And this is, 2 hours away, about 100 miles from us. And we had a couple of days where, in fact, we got a fair amount of smoke just because there was no marine breeze. We got high pressure that settled on northern part of California, and that created very little wind movement, and then so we got some of that smoke that drifted on us. But however, overall, it was a very sad story for Sonoma and Napa County to have so much smoke. But overall, the Anderson Valley in Mendocino County was pretty much pretty much not under the gun of that heavy smoke. So we've been pretty blessed by that.
That's great. There's also a question from Jan and Dick. What's the relationship, if any, between the wine industry and the cannabis industry in Anderson Valley?
Oh, that's a very good question. And that's so Mendocino County is a pretty special place. It has been kind of like the land where all the people that wanted to be away from civilization, that's where you go in Mendocino County if you want to be away from civilization. So up until the 70s, there was basically, only timber industry and some sheep herding. That was about it, until the 60s, 70s came. Some of the hippies leaving the cities of East Coast, West Coast, and then they ended up in the Anderson Valley, and they're starting some ag ventures and studied communes, and obviously they studied the marijuana industry as not on a commercial way, but as a way to basically use on site, and they would basically sell it to San Francisco. That was totally illegal back then, but that started really the wave of what Mendocino County was. And then it slowly came more and more relevant, in the area, especially in the Anderson Valley, even 15, 20 years ago. Everybody had a patch, in their back garden. You would have seen the vegetable patch and then the marijuana patch. It would be fairly usual. So, and it was like not even very hidden. And it became some kind of a more of a real business about less than 10 years ago. And it is actually now legal to grow marijuana in the area. So we compete in some ways for labor, because this is farm labor, ag labor. And then before it was illegal and we were competing for labor. Now it's legal and we compete for labor. So there's always been kind of that extra business that was we're competing against, except that the price of grapes is not the same as the price of marijuana. So sometimes it felt a little unfair to the grape industry. So now I think everything is a little bit more back to where it should be, a more level playing field. And I don't grow marijuana on the estate. It's purely grapes, just for the record. I'm going to join you. So I'm going to start with the Roederer Estate Brut non-vintage, and I'll talk a little bit about it. So when the family came to the area, to the Anderson Valley, the family thought that they wanted to craft something that would look like champagne, taste like champagne, but would be called a sparkling wine, because Champagne is the name of a region in France that is regulated. So if you make something that looks like champagne, but you are not in Champagne, you cannot call it champagne. So it is a sparkling wine, but it's called also a méthode champenoise. Champenoise method meaning it's made the same way as in Champagne. And the method champenoise means, in fact, no, you're making a wine, a base wine of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. You blend it, and then you bottle it for a second fermentation inside the bottle. So the bottle you are holding in your hand is not just a shipping container, it's actually a fermenter. The wine for that second fermentation was inside that bottle. It became under pressure inside that bottle. So yeast lived in that bottle. So the process of removing the yeast after they fermented, they settled, is called the disgorging. So disgorging is the active process of removing the dead yeast. And then you make up the lost volume of the wine by adding dosage. And then you can ship the wine to your customers. So it's a fairly long process. And then for Roederer Estate, we are very quality oriented. So it is about 3 years later, 3 years after harvest, that bottle of wine is released to you. So I'm holding the cork. If all of you know how to open a bottle of sparkling wine, so you remove the cage, the wire hood, hold the cork in your palm of your hand, and you, in fact, don't rotate the bottle. You don't twist the cork because it may break, but you rotate the cork, and then you let it slowly go, and it just, yes, a very nice noise. It doesn't startle the ladies, always a plus. If you're a party, feel free to let go the cork. It's the rallying cry, for a good party. So the wine is 60% Chardonnay, 40% Pinot Noir, and what is the trademark also of the house style in France and in California is, and I'm using 10 to 15% of wine from reserve that was aged in oak cask on average for 4 years. So in that bottle, this is, I'm not sure exactly which vintage you would be, which harvest you would be mostly drinking, but however, there's a code that's printed on the back of the label. There's a disgorging date, so that helps you a little bit more find out. You have a lot number, and underneath it says DISG, and then you have a month and then a year, so it tells you when was disgorged. So that one is a 60% Chardonnay, 40% Pinot Noir, and about 12%, so 10 to 15, 12% of reserve wine from cask from previous years. And what it gives the style of the house. It gives a bit more body to the meat palate, and also extends the finish of the wine. And it also creates a sense of depth to the wine. It's typical of what is done in France at Louis Roederer. It's a fun wine because it's bubbly and sparkling, but also a serious wine because it is a white wine that's been made with care, that has that toasty, aromatics from the aging on the yeast, but also that lemon juicy type of feel from the Chardonnay, and that finish is extended on that oak cask feel that makes some kind of a depth and length. So it lingers on something that's refreshing, but it also lasts a fair amount of time. So that's pretty typical of all the wine from the house from Roederer.
So I know I have 2 questions for you. One from Anthony, and he's asking, you said that you use Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Do you use any Pinot Meunier?
Right, so it's somebody knows it's there's varieties from Champagne.
Yeah.
So there's a very little bit of Meunier on the estate, not enough to say that there's actually really some. So I have 2 acres of Pinot Meunier, and the estate has 620 acres of vineyards. So I cannot say I don't have it, but I can say that it's barely it's a drop in the blend. So it's mostly based on Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
Perfect.
Not that Pinot Meunier is a bad variety. In fact, there's a reason why Pinot Meunier is used in Champagne. Bud break of Pinot Meunier compared to Pinot Noir is slightly delayed, meaning if you have some vineyard that is in a frost-prone area of your vineyards, what's going to create is you gain a little bit of time, and then if the spring frost can actually damage your vineyard. So if you gain 1 week, 10 days of a delayed bud break, that may be the reason why you may have a crop or not from that specific area. So Pinot Meunier is used in France in areas where you have frost issues. We don't here in California because we, in fact, have created ponds or water reserves. So we have ponds, and then we stock rainwater during the rainy season. And we have a system with water sprinklers. So if you have a frost issue and then you actually bring with the sprinklers, 55 gallons per minute of overhead sprinklers, you actually avoid frost damage. So this is kind of like the new world technique. If you have the space and the acreage to impound water, this is a great way to avoid frost, and then you can avoid also to plant Pinot Meunier. That's a long explanation to a short question, right?
That's a good answer. So the second question is about Stemware, and what do you recommend? And then I'll also ask you as well, how do you prefer to drink Roederer Estate? Really cold, moderately cold, open it for a while? Any different techniques?
All right. So Stemware, I don't have the perfect answer for you. I'm currently using a Stemware that is a hybrid between a flute and a white wine glass. You can see it. It has a narrow, pointy bottom, so it's very good to see the bubble train. So you can see really those bubbles rising. So it's very nice. But it has a wider opening, so you can actually also smell your wine. So it's a nice hybrid glass where you can actually enjoy the visual look of a sparkling, but you can also enjoy the aromatics of a well-made sparkling wine as you would with a white wine. If you don't have this type of Stemware, it's okay. You can use a white wine glass if you like to enjoy and sniff wine. If a sparkling wine is well made, it starts by being a very well made white wine. So there's a lot to discover as the wine warms up. Sorry, and that's something that a lot of people enjoy doing. So if you think that it's going to enjoy sparkling wine during lunch or dinner, a white wine glass is a fantastic way to do it. But I wouldn't dismiss the flute. The flute has something that I like to say is very sexy. You are at a party, you're at a cocktail party. A flute has something that is more casual, more fun, more sexy. So I'm using both, just depending of the occasion. Am I serious about discovering the wine? I'll go for a white wine glass. It's just for fun. I'm with friends, I'll go for the sexy option.
Perfect.
All right, so the wine in this case, spent this is about 3 years after harvest, and that's 2.5 years on the yeast, and about 6 months on the cork after disgorging. This is fairly typical of what I like doing. 2.5 years on the yeast, it means it brings enough of that yeasty, toasty characteristic of the yeast aging. And so it's not just about fruit. There is some fruit characteristics. You have that lemon character from the green apple that's typical from the Chardonnay from the Anderson Valley. And you have that ready toasty aromatics that kind of gives a warmer feeling. I like the Brut goes with a lot of food pairing. You can use it with aperitif. If you have like bread, saucisson, some cheese, it goes very well with it. Pasta, pizza, why not? Don't forget your oysters and your shellfish, because there's enough acidity to go well with shellfish, alike. Obviously, you don't want to use it too much with something that would be like meat. I would avoid it like if it's duck or things like that. But the rosé would be the other option. So that's maybe a good segue, to talk about the rosé. The rosé is 55% Pinot Noir, 45% Chardonnay. It is also aged on average 2.5 years on the yeast. And I like to release it also about 3 years after harvest. The same, there's a date of disgorging on the foil. It's a little easier to read because it's a dark ink on a pink foil, so it's a little easier to to see. All right. I'm gonna show the right example how to open the bottle. All right. not to pop it too loud. All right. So in this case, you'll see the color is different, and that's also a trademark of the house. We don't really make a rosé by color. Obviously, the color needs to be, welcoming, and you want to have some fun looking at it. It's a rosé I make by creating a blend that has not much color. So Pinot Noir base wine, Chardonnay base wine, also around 10% of reserve wine from the cask. And then I have a selection of a specially made red wine of Pinot Noir, and I add around 4% of it. Over the years and the vintages, it has ranged from 2.5 to 5.25%. And the idea is to create that very delicate salmon, copper color. So it's very delicate. It's not reddish. It's very delicate. It's more of a salmon type of color. And as the wine ages, you lose some of your red pigment, and it becomes more and more towards those copper salmon tinge, in the color. And I always felt that if the color is delicate, it's telling of how the wine is going to be, and it's going to be in the same vein of being fairly delicate. So the aromatics is a slightly more red berry. I can't say which berry, but it's more the realm of more red berry. Sometimes, with that, bread crustiness, from the yeast, there's something that is a little bit more of a crust, of a pie, like a red berry pie. There's something a little bit, crusty, caramelized, from it. That's typical, of a sparkling rosé that's aged a bit.
So Arnaud, we actually have a question about aging and laying down the bottle. And if you purchase it today and you lay it down for 5 years, does the current bottle age well?
So it's a discussion that is that I have often. A sparkling wine, I don't think it is, if I remember exactly my number, but I think 80% of the sparkling wine, and that includes champagne, that is bought today and used today. So not a lot of bottles made it overnight. So it's a slaughter of those bottles the day they are bought. However, actually, sparkling wine does age. If it's well done, it's a great white wine that has the benefit of being also bubbly. And as you age your bottle of a sparkling wine at home, what happens is the cork is going to in fact not leak the liquids, but it's going to leak gases. So carbon dioxide wants out the laws of physics, so you lose pressure very slowly, and also oxygen gets in. So you have that gas exchanges through the cork that allows the wine to in fact change. So if you're more liking your sparkling wine to be young and fruity, maybe you don't want to age your wine too much. But if you like that, all those tertiary aromas that develop from aging and getting a little bit of that oxidative character, and oxidative, it's a very slow oxidation, meaning you're going to go towards those notes of honey, caramel, which is typical of those ones that age slowly. Think of sherry. Think of port. Tawny port is typically of wine that has aged under oxidative character. So the wine gets a richness, a width from that oxidative aging. So if you like that, you can keep your sparkling wine 5 years, 10 years, in your cellar. You just have to be very careful to have a cellar that is temperature regulated. You really want to keep it always below 65 Fahrenheit. If you can keep it more like below 60, it's better to keep the wine, because every time your wine rises in temperature, the pressure inside the bottle rises. The natural pressure, when I ship it from the winery, is around 50 pounds of pressure inside the bottle. So when temperature rises, that pressure rises exponentially inside the bottle. What it does, it pushes the cork, it forces more carbon dioxide to be lost through the cork, and then you're gonna end up more chances of a flat bottle in 10 years from now if your temperature is not regulated where you store your wine. I've had flat bottles. I remember my parents keeping in a Jéroboam of Laurent Perrier, for a few years. There was always the reason to open that Jéroboam was never good enough. Oh, no, let's wait. We'll open that for. So we finally ended up for the wedding of my brother, and after maybe 20 years in the cellar, we finally opened it, and it was flat. Which was a shame. However, the wine was so good, it was a fantastic white wine we enjoyed. So if it's a very good bottle of wine, you may not have the fizz that you expect, but you may end up having something also very interesting to discover. It's like the beauty of the base wine of that bottle of champagne or sparkling wine. Obviously, you don't want to open a flat bottle. So keeping temperature correct is the way to do it.
Does that change between the non-vintage bubbles and the vintage bubbles?
Say that again? What?
Does the laying down change dramatically between non-vintage bottles like the Brut and the Rosé versus the vintage bottles like the L'Hermitage that we're about to talk about?
Right. So by design, the bottles of the non-vintage, Brut and Rosé, I keep them on the yeast on average 2.5 years. So the yeast extraction is a little less. So you have something a bit more fruit forward, a bit more youthful in its character. So it's usually the style that you wanna have. The vintage cuvée would have been aged at least 5 years on the yeast. So you have something that is way more toasty, bread crusty, in the aromatics of the wine already. So you already have a difference in terms of how you taste one versus the other. So that said, if you keep them on the cork, you lay down in your cellar for a certain period of time, you're going to have on both of those wines, those tertiary aromas, developing. And then again, it's going to go towards that, caramelized, honey, butterscotchy type of aromas. It means on the Brut non-vintage, that fruity character will disappear. So if you like that fruity character, maybe this is not what you want to do. If you already like a more aged wine like the L'Hermitage, maybe this is more to your liking to age it, further, and then create that extra layer of complexity in the wine, and that would work. Again, it doesn't mean that you cannot age a bottle of of multi-vintage Brut. I've bottled from the early bottling that we did from 88, and I've 88, 89, and I've opened quite a few of those during dinners, winemaker dinners, and I've for the guests to be able to enjoy and then basically learn about what is that you get when you age a bottle of sparkling wine for a long time. What's the type of family of aromas you get, and then to be exposed to it, just because it's rare to find one, and then to understand also what type of aromatics you would get. And I've never heard anybody saying that they disliked it. It's just really very different, and it's a different enjoyment of the wine. All right.
Nice.
So I'm going to enjoy more of the rosé. So food pairing. So food pairing, I have that vivid memory of I was a young winemaker and I was invited to do a lunch event in Boston, and then the chef had created a lunch menu that I had not seen before I arrived on site. He had paired the rosé with a steak tartare. Steak tartare is the raw beef meat with a lot of spices. And then when I saw that on the menu, it was like, oh God, what's going to happen? And I'd never tried myself. It was not something that I had in mind as a food pairing, sparkling rosé with steak tartare. In fact, it was a beautiful idea. So I speak about it 15, 18 years later, because I thought it was something that works very well. So rosé is pretty fantastic with everything. Obviously, you can enjoy it as is. It works very well with all the fish. You think salmon, everything that is a bit of fat. The acid of the sparkling wine is very good to cut through the fat of that, of that food. So, a fat fish or some fish that could be like, sole fish, but in butter, a la plancha style, or or a steak tartare meat that has some fat or some spices. It can work very well with it. Rosé has that quality of being able to work with a lot of food. So it's the kind of bottle so you want to have in your fridge all the time, because if you don't know what you're going to be doing, you can always bottle of rosé, right? It's going to work. Plus, if friends come over with just olives and bread and and a little bit of ham, why not? It works as well. So it's not that I don't like the other wine, but I think rosé has that special place where it's very easy to drink with a lot of things.
Agreed.
I'm gonna go back to share my screen again. I wanted to show a couple more shots of the Anderson Valley, and so that was the picture of the vineyard and the rolling hills. I wanted to show this. This is the one side of the winery. It was the guest entrance of the tasting room, and the family, when they designed that winery back in 1986, they wanted the building to, in fact, be very non-obtrusive, to be basically hidden in the surroundings. So it was designed as it would look like an old barn. Around in the area, a lot of redwoods, a lot of old barns that were made with the redwood planks on the outside, and it takes that very good-looking, weathered, brownish type of look. And then so the building, the winery is fairly large. It's 48,000 square feet. It's half on the ground, and the part that is above ground is covered with those old redwood planks, and it makes it like an old building, as if it had been there forever. So I think it's a very nice building. I was talking about my reserve wine. So this is a picture taken of some of my casks in the reserve in the winery. I have 64 of those. The one we see in that picture, they actually hold 1,800 gallons each. Each cask is one vintage. So after each harvest, when I taste the wine and I rank the wines by quality level, some of my best wines end up going into cask, into reserve, as is. So it's not bubbly. It's really the wine as is. It's a base wine of Chardonnay. And it goes into those casks for aging on average for 4 years. The wine gets two things. It extracts a little bit of the oak character from the cask, but the ratio of oak to liquid is fairly low, right? So you don't have a lot of cask influence, or a lot of oak influence. It's just a little bit. It brings tannins, it brings a bit of texture and density, and you also get a little bit of that oxygen pickup, in the cask, where that one becomes a bit more complex. So when you bring it as a blending component, that one from multiple cask, so multiple vintage, in that bottle. So your bottle is by design a non-vintage. There's not a vintage written on the label, but by blending construction, it's a multi-vintage. There's more than one vintage, in the bottle. That creates the style of the house. That creates that seamless feeling of the wine. And this is the tool I've learned to use, working for the family now for over 22 years. Another shot, that's some of that Pinot vineyard, Pinot grapes, in the vineyards, around August, not long before harvest. All right, so I wanted to show a couple of pictures just to give some visuals of what we talk about, here in the Anderson Valley. I'm going to be opening the third wine, the third bottle. So that's the L'Hermitage. That's the vintage cuvée of Roederer Estate. This is vintage 2013. So vintage 2013. I also use a little bit of cask. So there is the rule in California for winemaking. You can call a wine vintage if it is up to, no less than 95% of wine in that vintage. So I've used a little bit of cask in that wine, only 4%, and that was vintage 2011. So this vintage 2011, that was used at time of blending and bottling. So there's the same also. If you can look at the bottle you have, you can look at the disgorging date. I need my glasses because, and that was disgorged on my side, January of 2020. So in October, so we've been a little over 9 months now after disgorging. So the vintage bottled, so it's 2013. So it was bottled in spring of 2014 and disgorged early 20. So we nearly spent 5.5 years on the yeast before disgorging. So it's easy to do the math in this case. So the same, there's a nice bubble train. You can see the foam creating around. That's, foam is something that is very interesting. It's a complex of proteins that basically is like a framework of proteins. And then the carbon dioxide is basically trapped inside that frame of protein. It makes the bubble to last. So in fact, during winemaking, you really want to be very careful at basically keeping all the proteins that from the grapes, because they help create that ring of foam, that nice, delicate, feel of foam. So I'm not saying that my winemaking is like do nothing, but I have winemaking that is, fairly hands off in order to keep as much as possible from the grape that I get from the estate, to create this. So the aromatics that you would want to compare from the first bottle, this is nearly 52% Chardonnay, 48% Pinot Noir. So there's a slightly more Chardonnay. However, it doesn't taste as fruity, as green apple, as lemony as the Brut non-vintage. There's a little more crusty and toasty aromatics. I have a little bit of really more crusty, a little bit of a flint, feel to it, something more mineral. That's not typical of one that's stayed no longer in a bottle. What's typical also of wine that ages a long time on yeast is the sense of creaminess, the sense of something that is, soft, creamy, more seamless. That's the one that's the most, in terms of acidity, in terms of pH and acid level, this is the most acidic wine. I don't like using the word acidic. It seems it's a negative thing, but chemistry-wise, this is the one that's the most acidity. However, it doesn't show the acidity because it has that extraction from the yeast component. We call that the polysaccharides, from the yeast. They create that that coating, and that also tricks the brain to think this is sweetness, when in fact it's not sweetness. It's kind of like a body created by those polysaccharides. There's a little bit of dosage as well, but there's less dosage on the Hermitage than the previous two bottles. So in fact, there's less sugar added, but there's a feeling of more roundness, and this is really the yeast extraction. In fact, if you push it, you could say that if that one had aged even longer, you could nearly go with something that would be no dosage, no sugar added, because the complexity of the wine, the yeast extraction creates that sense of width that could make it easy to add no sugar to the wine. In fact, in this case, this is about 8 grams of dosage for the one that are interested.
So Arnaud, I have a few questions for you. First would be from Brian, determining price points and comparing to champagne. And then we'll go back to Jonathan's question.
I don't know. I don't sell it. I just make it and I drink it. So
That's fair.
No, obviously, the region of Champagne is a very old appellation d'origine, in France, and then it's actually there's a set number of acres, in the area. So Champagne is about 84,000 acres. It's extremely complicated to plant more because it is by law and regulation. You can't really expand the region. So whenever something is limited, in terms of of its acreage. It means there's a set number of of vineyard quantity, pounds of grapes made every year. So it tends to drive the price up a little bit. So grapes, the price of the grapes in Champagne is fairly expensive. Last that I remember, you're about €6.50 per kilo, and you have 2 pounds in a kilo. So for the fruits, in Champagne, and I'm less than half of that, in California already. So there's already the raw material, the grape themselves, are a little cheaper in California, even though we're catching up, fairly quick, because the cost of real estate in California is going up. So cost of production is going up as well. So we may catch up at some point, but for now, there's still the grapes in California are a little cheaper. So it could be one reason. And obviously the reason of we're still even though we've been established in the early 80s, we're still babies compared to some of those old estates in Europe that have been in business for hundreds of years. So there is also the aura of that established brand that can drive the price up.
And so I have a question from Jonathan about different expressions from Roederer Estate. So you were just talking about L'Hermitage. Would you consider that a tête de cuvée? And then have you also thought about doing a Blanc de Blanc or a Blanc de Noir?
Right. So L'Hermitage is exactly true. This is the tête de cuvée of Roederer Estate. So it's the flagship of the winery to showcase the best we can do on a great vintage. This is on the vintage 2013 is only about 4,000 cases made, when I make about 80,000 cases of the Roederer Estate Brut, multi-vintage. So it gives already a sense of of scale. L'Hermitage, 4,000 cases versus 80,000 cases of the Brut. So it's a selection of the best the wine of a given vintage, best Pinot and Chardonnay, and on top of it, you extend the aging by doubling or even more than doubling, the aging. So that is exactly the idea behind the tête de cuvée. Be the best you can be. And the second part of the question, sorry, I forgot the second part of the question.
No worries. It's have you ever thought about making a Blanc de Blanc, I guess?
So it's totally possible. I mean, everything I make is separate, to start with. So I have pure Chardonnay, pure Pinot, that I could bottle as is. I think so far my predecessor and myself, since we started making sparkling wine from the National Valley, we always felt there was something really great about using the combination of both of those varieties. The Chardonnay has that part of being that fruity character, again, very lemony, green apple, but sometimes it lacks a little bit of that structure. And then the Pinot sometimes can be very austere, but it brings that also backbone and density. So by playing with both of those varieties, you can create something that is kind of like a little bit the best of both worlds. Something not too austere, but that could have the fruitiness, liveliness of it. So by playing on the proportions of both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, you create something that is, very, seamless all the time. I could make a Blanc de Blanc or Blanc de Noir. For now, it seems like I never have enough wine to make, the other cuvée that I want to make. So it seems like, I need to plant more vineyards, to do it.
It's a good problem to have. Also, another question about L'Hermitage. Where does the name come from? And what's the history behind it?
Right. So the family, who owns Champagne Louis Roederer, has a long lineage of being very successful making champagne, in France, and then they became very famous and wealthy because at some point they became the drink of choice, the champagne of choice of the aristocrats in Russia before the Bolshevik Revolution. So much so that the Tsar of Russia, Alexander II, wanted to have a very special cuvée made only for him. And to be very special, it had to be bottled in a very expensive type of container. It was a bottle made of crystal, so hand-blown crystal. So it was very expensive at the time. So only the Tsar could afford such a treat. And that became the reason why the crystal cuvée also got resurrected years later. But long story short, so that's the link of the family making its recognition, its wealth, shipping to Russia, as kind of like the reason why maybe they made it through nearly 3 centuries. And then when they established the estate here in California, they wanted to create the tête de cuvée that would be a way, a little blink to history of why they were successful. And then the Anderson Valley is actually, it's funny enough, located between 2 points that have a Russian name. So the Russian River is in Sonoma County to the east of me. And then there's Fort Bragg, that was an old Russian fur trading post right on the coast. So that felt very funny to pick the Anderson Valley, where you had like that Russian impact around us. And so the name L'Hermitage is after the museum in St. Petersburg in Russia that was built and looking very much like the Chateau of Versailles in France, because the aristocrats in Russia was extremely Francophile back then. So L'Hermitage is a little bit that connection to the historical winemaking and with Russia. It was too long of an answer, I dazzled you on this one.
That was good.
So L'Hermitage is not made every year. My predecessor, myself, we've skipped the vintages. It's only made on the years where we believe they actually showcase everything that you expect from an Hermitage. You need something that has a fair amount of acidity, because the wine is really built to age. Like any racehorse, it has to have that great pedigree to be able to age. So if there's one wine that has been built from the beginning to be enjoyable now after 5 years, but also in 10 more years, actually this is L'Hermitage, because the acid actually is gonna keep the underlying part of the wine alive, but also to pick up gracefully that oxygen through aging, so that you get those third aromas that you get from aging on the cork, and still have a one that's still very graceful. And actually we've just released a 2004 late Disgorge at the tasting room and to the wine club. So it's a wine that I disgorged also in January of 2020. So that's a 2004, and it was bottled in 2005. So it's been 15 years on the yeast, and now it has also on top of it another 10 months on the cork, and just releasing now. So it's nearly 16 years in the bottle. So it's something that has a great presence, and I attribute that because the wine, when I made it, I had that core acid that makes it live forever. This is the tête de cuvée promise. Yeah.
That's great. Jan and Dick have another question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but do the Chinese have a type of favorite bubbles? Is that the correct question?
I'm not sure. I cannot say. We do export. Our export markets, are mostly Japan and Canada. We do export a little bit to China, but not that much. So I'm not sure exactly what the Chinese market would like better. I know that the Japanese market has a taste buds that are pretty good. They are really have the same taste as, you know, European taste. They like wine that have, you know, that are very layered. So they love l'Hermitage. It works well with sushi, by the way. All right. No more questions? Well, I have more to say and more to talk about. So the estate is 100% in the Anderson Valley. All of the 620 acres of the vineyard are in the Anderson Valley. And then we didn't start with such a large acreage. We started with 340 acres, and we, you know, planted more vineyards as the winery grew. So Roederer Estate is estate. So all of the fruit comes from the estate, from the Anderson Valley. So no grapes comes from the outside. Also is a limiting factor because it means, you know, I cannot grow and double the number of bottles I make, you know, overnight. You know, the fruit needs to come from the estate. I'm mostly planted on Pinot Noir. I have about 55% of the vineyard is Pinot Noir, 45% is Chardonnay. Even though my blend is about reverse. Why? Is because the yield on Pinot tends to be always less than Chardonnay. So yield-wise, I need less acreage of Chardonnay because I get more yield from it. Everything is hand-picked and a whole cluster pressed. So the grapes and the fruit is picked in small containers, about half-ton container. Those containers are moved by tractors or by small trucks from the vineyards around us and brought to the crush pad. That's where, you know, you allocate your lots of Pinot and Chardonnay, and then you load your presses, and then you press your fruits. You know, it's called whole cluster pressing. And what is typical of a method champenoise is you want to separate your juice fractions. So the quality of your first drop of juice to the last drop of juice is not the same. That's something that is absolutely key to the method champenoise. So the first fraction, the one that's the best balance of sweetness and acid, is called the cuvée fraction. So if you, for the people that like numbers, so 1 ton of fruit can yield up to 185 gallons of juice. So 1 ton of grapes, 185 gallons of juice if you were to press everything. But the cuvée fraction represents about 125 gallons. So that's the nice acid level, nice fruitiness, and this is the first fractions that pressed early in the cycle. And if you keep pressing, meaning you spend more time in the press, you have to also apply more pressure. In order to extract juice, you also have to tumble your presses more often in order to keep extracting juice from those presses. Then you get into the fraction called taille fraction. In the taille fraction, the acid tends to drop, so it's less acid, but it's also less sweet, and you start to bruise the skin of your fruit, so you start to extract tannins from the skin. Those tannins, those polyphenols, tends to have a slightly harsher, you want to think, something more bitter in terms of the feeling of the wine. So it's one that's not as balanced, tends to be softer, and also not as enjoyable. And then if you keep pressing, you get into what we call the hard press fraction. It's called the Robèche fraction. In Champagne, by regulation, Robèche is absolutely not allowed in the winemaking. So you can only make Champagne out of cuvée and taille. In California, there's no such regulation. So if you can make a sparkling wine out of cuvée, taille, and Robèche, and you can sell it, great for you. However, for quality purposes, if you are a house that's where quality matters, you want to use obviously all of the cuvée, as little taille as possible, and obviously no Robèche. So we can pride ourselves to have been a cuvée only winemaking house, for nearly forever. I take a super tiny amount of taille every year. This is a little bit my salt and pepper type of wine that I can use. Some years being a little bit more acidic. It is good to have something that is softer by design. And I can use that a little bit in the blend only of the non-vintage cuvée, never ever in the l'Hermitage cuvée, which means that I am selling a fair amount of juice, or basically I'm selling most of my taille juice and Robèche juice. So I'm making only the sparkling, based on the cuvee fraction. And then if you look at what it means in terms of volume, it means I'm keeping only 125 out of 185, meaning I'm not using 60 gallons per ton, which is 1/3 of the volume of the juice that I could use is actually not used. So it's an investment in quality to basically decide from the beginning to not use 1/3 of your raw material. You have to put your microphone on, Donnie.
Sorry about that. Klaus had a good comment, and we could turn that into a discussion as well if we have time. But he said that he did not hear the term yeast, and he said to me that was the most distinguishing feature of Champagne. Do you have any relation or correlation to Anderson Valley, I guess?
You mean about the yeast?
Mm-hmm.
I do ferment, some wine on native yeasts, but not for sparkling, for still wine. So all the still wine, all the sparkling base are actually fermented with yeast that I'm actually buying from my yeast supplier. A little bit by design, the juice that you get of cuvee from Pinot and Chardonnay, the fruit is picked early in the season. In fact, to a still winemaker, I'm picking unripe fruit. They look at that as being unripe, meaning it is low in sugar, but high in acid. So it makes resulting wine being around 11.5% alcohol, and pH that's around 3 to 3.1. So that's fairly acidic. So only some strains of yeast, and those strains were selected in Champagne 30, 40 years ago, actually known to do fairly well in such an environment where the must, the juice is very hard to ferment. So not any yeast can ferment to dryness, juice that are fairly tough to ferment. And then some yeasts that exist out there, what they can do is actually promote some aromas to be cut from their bound form in the skin. They can cut those aromas that are bound and release them, so they would tend to make wine that are fruitier. In the case of sparkling wine, especially when you do something that is released 2.5 years to 6 years later, all those primary aromas have disappeared already. So I'm not looking at getting the young yeast fruity character, because it's going to disappear anyway through the aging process. So the yeast that you're looking at using is really something that can ferment successfully to dryness, your juice, and not give off any aromas, and not especially give some specific flavor to the wine. They're going to give flavor, but in fact from the fact of aging on the yeast, and that's phenomena. It's called yeast autolysis. So the yeast breakdown, the reality is like it's decaying, right? But nobody wants to have something decaying in your glass of wine. But that's the concept. Yeast autolysis is like the yeast breakdown, and then they release back to the wine proteins, and proteins are made of amino acids. Those amino acids also break down. Some of those amino acids contain sulfur compounds, and some of those sulfur compounds bind and make disulfur compounds that actively you can smell. So that toasty, bready, crusty aromas are in fact disulfur compounds that reach a threshold where you can actually smell them and taste. So every yeast are made of proteins and DNA. So any yeast can actually give off those yeasty compounds because it's just the nature of amino acids and proteins. So you had another question, Donnie?
Not as of right now, but if anyone has any questions, I believe we're coming to the end. So please chime in if you have any questions for Arnaud.
Yeah, turn off your microphone, jump in.
I'm going to unmute everyone. So if you guys have any questions, please.
Ew.
Don't be shy.
He's like, why would you do like that? Sorry. That's got to be a water bottle.
If so, put your camera on too.
I wanted to add maybe something about the vineyards. So we've also started, moving into, growing more of the fruit organic. We started in 1999, starting, farming, some of the vineyard organic. So not all of the vineyard is organic. It's part of like, the learning experience that, we know we can farm more than the about 100 acres we farm currently organic. It is very labor intensive. And then as you've heard, there's been a crisis of labor in farming. It sounds, counterintuitive that, right now there is a fair amount of, unemployment, but it is still very hard to find people that want to, in fact, live and work in rural areas, and working in the field, is, not everybody wants to do it. So in fact, having people that are technically at the level of what we need is sometimes difficult to find. So there's a lot of training involved also of our team, and the hopes is that we're gonna keep increasing the amount of organic acreage that we farm here in the Anderson Valley.
Do you have a favorite time to visit the winery?
Sure. When it rains and it snows in Maryland, come over.
Thank you. Perfect.
Now, obviously, the season I like the most in California is actually right now. It's from September until we get the first rain, October, November. You have that very nice, fantastic weather where it's warm during the day but not too warm. Cooler nights, the leaves are turning color. It's a beautiful part of the season. And if you like going to San Francisco, that's also when you have way less fog in San Francisco. So if you end up going to San Francisco in July, August, September, it's pretty tough. It's just foggy and cool and not as enjoyable as either early spring or fall. All right. Any other question?
Yeah.
Kim, do you think
I have a question.
Yep. Right.
Which of the three is your favorite? It's hard, but
It's very hard. Ask a mother, which one of her child, is the favorite, right? No, she's not going to answer. Well, I like them all because they all fit, something that you try to create. I like that. I like the Brut non-vintage because it has that nice, green apple, lemony feel. It's very refreshing. I like it. It's like a no-brainer. The rosé fits very well with a lot of food. So the rosé is kind of like the food pairing magic. And I like the L'Hermitage just because once you pour it in your glass, and the wine even warms up a bit, you keep discovering more. So the L'Hermitage, that's that very interesting wine where you don't want to pour it too cold, but even if you start cold and then you put it in your glass, you're gonna keep discovering more and more and more as the wine warms up.
yeah,
It's made in such a way that it has a lot to offer. And in fact, the trick of the trade is if you have a bad wine, serve it ice cold, it's gonna numb your tongue and then you won't be able to find it's not that good.
yeah. So they have a little bit of a difference, or maybe they're very distinct. So it's hard to say.
That's right. So if they were all identical, it would be hard to say, but I believe I make them in such a way that every one of them has something else to offer that the one doesn't have. So it just depends on your mood. It depends on how you like your wine, or it depends on what kind of pairing you want to do. And
Yeah, or I guess the mood you're in a particular day.
Absolutely. And then we're talking about also aging your wine or not. Something that I say as a comparison is it's very hard to say also, well, you should age all of your wine 10 years before you enjoy them, because I don't know how you like the wine. Maybe you like it young and fruity, and maybe you don't want to wait 10 years and you think it would be, not to your liking. Same as, if you go to a steakhouse, some people are going to ask for that piece of steak to be rare, and somebody's going to ask it to be well done. And then both people will enjoy very much the same, piece of meat, but it's going to be cooked, slightly differently. So very hard to give, a blanket answer to a.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Welcome.
Arnaud, do you mind touching on harvest this year? When did you start? When did you finish? And how long it took? Briefly.
Right. So this year was, I don't know how to describe it, but it was, the harvest where everything that could go wrong could go wrong. It was difficult and nerve-wracking even before. Obviously, when you have 620 acres of vineyard to pick, because it's all within the same appellation and it's all only 2 varieties, they tend to ripen at the same time. So it means my harvest is always by design fairly condensed on 3-4 weeks maximum. So you need a lot of people in a short period of time. On the estate, the vineyard team full-time we have year-round is about 45 people. And then we're lucky to have a very loyal, good, group of people. We also provide a housing. So we house 80% of our people between, the family housing, condos, houses that we have. So we house them on site. But 45 people is not enough for harvest. We need about 180 to 200 people to harvest the grapes within the given enough time. And with the problem of the virus, we had a hard time getting some of our people to come back and pick for us. We have some of that labor actually lives in Mexico most of the time, and then they come and help us, come for a month, and then they go back. So we had a hard time getting some of those people to come and pick for us. And for some, it took us some time for them to get there because also of extra paperwork and everything. So it ended up that it was really day by day. We got lucky that I had a fairly small harvest. It's a bad news because I always like more grapes, but in fact it was not a plentiful harvest 2020. I didn't have a lot of people, but I didn't have that much grapes to pick either. We could maintain everybody safe. We had no injuries, no outbreak of virus in the team. There was a lot of work to keep also the team separate, working staggered teams and everything. There was a lot of extra work that we had to think about and organize ourselves. And we started August 12th, the harvest. So before everybody, it also helps to find labor when you're the first one to pick. We pick at around 18.5 to 19 bricks to start with. Still wine, they start picking at 23 bricks and beyond. So we're always the first ones. The fires, the first fire started after August 17th, and we finished harvest on September 3rd. So we had about 2 weeks of picking grapes under conditions where things were getting a little tricky around us. However, we never had any fire nearby or anything really bad. So again, now looking backwards, it's like, oh, that was easy. In retrospect, it was much easier than the nightmare scenario that envisioned. All right.
All right. Well, I think we've come to our time, but if anyone has any other questions, feel free to email me and I'll pass them on to Arnaud and Donnie so that we can get them answered for you. This session is also being recorded, so we'll share this out with you in a few days once it gets all downloaded and stuff like that. But from Calvert Woodley, we just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's attending tonight and to Roederer Estate for joining us. And yes, cheers to you. We're so excited that we could hear from you guys tonight, and we're really looking forward to the next vintages that we're going to try in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you everybody for your time. Have a safe weekend, a safe evening, And remember,
you.
there's never a better day to drink sparkling wine, champagne than every day.
Salud,
Okay.
salud.
Salud. Salud. Cheers.
I agree.
Okay.